Hello and welcome to the Womxn Show. I'm Lenina Rassool and today we are speaking about food insecurity, food kitchens and food networks. After the break, we'll be in conversation with two organizations, Urban Food Futures and Food Agency Cape Town, where we'll be speaking about the impact and value of food kitchens in communities. But before that, we're going to have a look at a short video produced by Food Agency Cape Town about the impact of food insecurity on households. Let's have a look.
If I was to ask you what hunger looks like in your areas, places you live, what would you say?
It looks like me. It doesn't really have a face. You can't tell who's hungry and who isn't because I think the large majority is hungry. Yeah, everyone is hungry. So there isn't really a specific face that you can pin to hunger.
So the right to food looks like having space and the agency to grow your own food. The right to food looks like having the autonomy to choose what you buy and what you eat every day. The right to food is having a wholesome, nutritious meal to eat every day for families, all households, and it's difficult to imagine in the state that we live in and the reality.
Mentally, I think that creates a ton of strain that no one really talks about. No one really talks about being hungry and not having enough food. And I think that's a feeling that people feel quite often, that there isn't enough food. I haven't, like there's times when I've thought, okay, what am I going to eat today? And my solution to not thinking about that is to stay constantly busy, to constantly be up to something. But then there comes a time when I can't even motivate myself to go beyond that. Yeah, I think psychologically it stagnates an entire population, and we just constantly stay in survival mode. And when you're in survival mode, you can't think beyond today. You can't think beyond the next 12 hours. Yeah, it's sort of like, it's hand to mouth.
What was around me. A lot of people lost their jobs, they lost their incomes, and then they found themselves faced with a whole lot. When I'm saying a whole lot is you would find that in a typical household, a father would get up and go to work. Maybe there are 2 or 3 children that would be at school the whole day. Suddenly everyone is at home. Suddenly there's a lot of mouths to be fed, and suddenly then the realization that we actually do not have enough food, because then you'd have to prepare more meals than you would normally. Sometimes in some households they don't even make breakfast, because the school's feeding scheme would provide breakfast, and then they would provide lunch for the children. So many of them did not go and queue for the food. During the survey we would ask, do you know that there is a soup kitchen? Are you aware of a soup kitchen that is in the area? They would say yes. Do you go and queue or get food? They would say no. The reason for that was we'd found that there is a lot of stigma that is attached to being hungry. That is the norm in the communities that we live in. So imagine someone who would be working and providing and being able to buy food, suddenly finding themselves not having food and having to go queue. So they have this of what would people say?
My observation then comes very close to home, where we've seen the lived experience of people who've lost their jobs, who've really struggling to access food. It's worse with this war in Ukraine that we're seeing, and all of a sudden these price rises going through the roof.
I think a community nutritional hub is already a space. I mean, community kitchens currently are already a space whereby people go to receive food. There are emergency hub spots for food insecurity, for hunger, and many more interrelating social issues that are related to food insecurity and hunger.
Soup kitchens, popularly known as soup kitchens, but as Food Agency Cape Town, we started rethinking them as community kitchen based on the outcomes of the survey that we did, how they get stigmatized and how people don't feel comfortable to go in the kitchens. But if you think of a community kitchen, and our vision of a community kitchen is a space where people can go and not just get a plate of food, but can learn a skill, where we try to build sustainable and resilient communities. So you come into a kitchen, you volunteer your services. You can help with dishing up, you can help with cleaning up, for instance, or washing the dishes, and then you don't feel that you are just getting a plate of food. You feel that you have contributed towards that plate of food. Ouagadougou. Again, my appeal to other international organizations and local government is partner with local communities, dream together, plan together, find solutions together, and support community-led organizations. I believe that the solutions are within the communities.
I love to see young people take up space in these spaces because young people come with a newness that is very oblivious to what the problem is, and sometimes that obliviousness feeds a lot into generating new ideas.
So yeah, the call to action would be people to be educated on food agency, on their rights to food, and to be enabled for them to practice their rights to food.
Welcome back. You're still watching The Womxn Show, and we are speaking about food insecurity, food kitchens, and food networks. And joining me here in studio to speak about this is Nicole Paganini, who is a project lead with Urban Food Futures, and Nomonde Buthelezi, who is a project coordinator on Food Agency Cape Town. So, ladies, welcome, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
So, as I've said, we're speaking about food insecurity, and we're looking at, we're going to be speaking about a project that was done by Urban Food Futures and Food Agency Cape Town that explored food kitchens in communities that are vital anyway, but particularly during COVID-19. And I'm not going to pretend to know what exactly the project was. So, Nicole, you've been here before to speak about this, so give us a refresher and tell us what was the project.
Yeah, thank you for having us. So the project is a really interesting one because Nomonde was actually the one asking during COVID, saying, what can we do to be more than the statistics? And we started to document how communities cope with crisis, particularly during the first lockdown. And a lot of soup kitchens, community kitchens emerged. And there was a lot of support. And right after, let's say, the first lockdown, a lot of this support kind of disappeared. And it was so fascinating to see how communities came together. There was this social networks across the communities, across different races, different cultures, different age groups. And we are working now through our partnership with Food Agency Cape Town with a network of women who run community kitchens in different areas. And we try to look what role do they play to fight food security, food insecurity, which is a major challenge in most areas of the city.
That's really interesting. And so before we speak about the kitchens and Food Agency Cape Town, I just, I'm pulled in by you were doing this research about how communities were coping during the crisis. And I was just wondering, were there interesting insights there? I mean, food was obviously one of them, but any interesting insights that emerged around the COVID-19? And just to say that COVID-19 was interesting because there was a lockdown.
Exactly, exactly. So what was actually interesting is that we thought in 2020 this is now going to be the major crisis, and it was, because the informal sector kind of was shut down also by government. But in the end, we saw that it's particularly women in communities who think about what to do, and they had to rely on each other. So it wasn't really possible for a household. I mean, a lot of households had to reduce their costs for food because there was no income. So they cut corners everywhere. But like this coping and bouncing back was mainly through communities and through networks, and that was really fascinating. And we thought actually in 2020, this is the crisis. Comes 2020 with the war in Ukraine, comes load shedding, comes ongoing gender-based violence, which is like a major, let's call it an endemic in this country. So there are so many crises interacting, and it's really fascinating to see that it's particularly women who run these kitchens. According to our survey, it's more than 90% of women who do the work, and that's fascinating.
That is interesting. Thank you. Nwande, please tell us, what is Food Agency Cape Town, and how does it interact with the food kitchens?
Food Agency Cape Town is an organization, an activism organization that advocates for the people's right to food. So we are very much active in communities, mainly in the Cape Flats. It was mostly, well, it started mostly emerging during COVID, at the height of COVID. And it was a response from the communities, a requirement or recommendation to say, hey, this is the situation, and we need some kind of an organization or a vehicle to be able to communicate with, the relevant duty bearers, so to speak. So during that, when, Nicole mentioned soup kitchens / community kitchens. So at the time, I mean, we started rethinking the so-called soup kitchens into community kitchens, because they are run by women and they are serving more than just food. They become your therapist, just like your hairdresser. So they offer more than just a plate of food. They are there for support. Sanitary towels, they distribute baby food, they offer advice, and they first responders to GBV victims. Yeah, so that's where the network also started emerging. So as an agency, as Food Agency Cape Town, we partnered with already existing community kitchens, where we were, because they're the ones that were actually serving the people during COVID, where food was really an issue. Yeah.
You've also pulled me in now when you speak about the right to food.
Yes.
And so I'm sure through your advocacy and through the reports that you do, we've been speaking a lot on the Womxn Show about the Constitution, about our rights to different things. You spoke about duty bearers. So what is some of the advocacy that you speak about when you talk about people's right to food?
First is understanding what that means, what that clause in that particular constitution is. What does it, for me as a person or as a community person, do I understand what my right to food is? If so, how do I even start to claim it? How do I even start to converse with the duty bearers or the people that are supposed to allow me to have access to healthy and nutritious food? Because we're not just talking about food for the sake of food. It has to be nutritious as well.
I like that. And so that was one of my things, actually, that it's not just like giving them bread and peanut butter, right? And so we've actually, when we had someone who ran a community kitchen for at an ECD, who started she was just appalled at like what was being provided by the state, which was bread and peanut butter and bread and jam, and started making, so she was growing spinach and so forth. And it was very interesting because one of the things I particularly remember is that there was pushback against that. It was like, oh, kids won't eat this food, this healthy, nutritious food. And actually, it came to a point where the kids didn't want to eat the bread anymore. They wanted to eat this. I loved what you said about understanding what is our right to food. You gave me something that I hadn't actually thought about before. And I just want to expand. And so when you say that, and when you, I'm assuming, do some education and so forth, like what is a frame that people can think about when if we ask ourselves that question, is there an answer for it?
Yeah, well, it's not, like you had said, it's not just about getting or giving food, or it's more like understanding how should government provide access, what channels or what provision should they be made available in communities in order for us to have access to those. So economy, number one, is because we need money for anything. So in as much as we can have initiatives to start food gardens, there are some things that you need to buy, even when we're thinking about the kitchens, in terms of energy, like how do you prepare the food? Electricity, the prices are going high. units are getting even lower to buy gas. It's getting much more. So what provision or what access or how is the government actually making my situation better so that I have access to these food? If we're thinking about shops and what is available in the supermarkets, the survey that we did, we were asking where do people mostly access their food? So the numbers for supermarkets were high. Food and food vendors around the corners were high instead of the supermarkets. There also the other thing that we're kind of talking about, because we're having dialogues in communities discussing that clause in the Constitution, is that our rights are violated more than once. One, on what is available on the shelves. I don't really have a choice. What I have in my pocket influences and tells me or dictates what kind of foods I have access to. So I would want to eat healthy and nutritious food, but do I afford it? No. So we don't really look at, I don't buy by choice. I may have a particular brand that I would love to buy, but because I don't have enough money to get that bread, then I'm forced to buy the bulk, which I don't even know how it was processed, maybe like highly processed food that will have later really serious health implications. So that right is also violated. And not just me, but the whole family. And you're thinking about children, they are the future. If you're thinking about how that health is, how it's affecting, the children, like the malnutrition, if you're looking at the stats for the malnutrition for children. So what I'm providing as a mother has longer health implications on the children. So future is really compromised when it comes to health. So there's quite a few rights that are being violated.
And if we just look, I think like everywhere I look, everywhere you look already, you are guilt-tripped into what you should be feeding them so that they can function at school and just everywhere at optimal levels, as if everybody enjoys this privilege. And so when you think about it and you just cannot afford, I mean, I will tell you, when I am running low, consumption of bread goes up here. We can eat bread like the whole day, and we will not see even a banana in that house or an apple in that house for like a whole week at the end of the month. And so it's completely realistic, and that affects your digestion. Everything. It's heavy, so you can't actually stay awake properly and learn. And so I worry about those things, and so thank you. I mean, that is so vital and so important, and I think so relevant to the conversation we're having now around food kitchens and around the provision of food and access to food to food insecure communities. Nicole, I want to come back to you. So now we've had, and I think it was said in the report, 90% of the food kitchens sprang up during the COVID-19 pandemic and during the lockdown. And so we know that there were food kitchens before that were already dealing, and so we're not saying that there was no food insecurity prior to COVID-19. It just made it much worse and exacerbated that because it stopped the income in many households. And so 90% of those sprang up. We were saying also 90% of them are run by women. And we just get this correct. Urban Food Futures were already doing research around food insecurity and so forth. What was then the partnership with the food kitchens, with Food Agency Network? Like, what did that segue into?
That's actually something I want to lean into Nomonde's point on. People can only afford that kind of food they have enough money for. And I think that's often when we look at food insecurity that we think we need to increase production, so everyone should be farming. But in the end, what we found in our previous research is that food security is determined by how much money you have. So we need to look at it from a consumption perspective. And I think especially that point of what kinds of food do communities want to eat, and culturally, socially, health-wise, is a big question. And it's not often looked at in both policy and research. And I think also, I mean, the Constitution of South Africa is really great and very progressive if you look at it from a global perspective. But the implementation of these food programs isn't really targeted at the communities that are suffering high numbers of food insecurity. There's, for example, amazing programs to support small-scale farmers, but how do you farm in the Cape Flats when you don't have access to land, or when your land is really on 2 square meters? You can grow 2 or 3 bunches of spinach, but that's it. That's not feeding your family. So I think really looking at a systemic approach to think how to change the food system, also from a community perspective, was quite vital in that research. And what was absolutely inspiring to me is also the power behind these kitchens. So it's as Nomanda said, it's not just feeding a plate of soup or your 3 slices of bread and peanut butter. It's also being a GBV ambassador, being like a hub in a community where people come and discuss about food and feel that there's a safer space for them to go. And I think that's a systemic support where also the state could come in and really use these kitchens as a hub and basically lever on what's already there. So basically build on the power and the structure that was created by women. And I think that's really fascinating to see.
I love that. That's a great way to explain, because I have to say, I was reading through the research reports and I still couldn't get my own perspective sort of past food kitchen.
Yes.
Responding to food insecurity, giving people food who don't have food. But this research project is taking it, like when you're speaking now about a community perspective and what else it does, and using the term hub, we're moving away from that. We're moving from a more empowered space and saying this isn't just a space to give people food who don't have food. This is a space that provides a community service that empowers the community. And so maybe you can just expand on what you sort of mean by that, in that shift in terms of how you want people to look at it differently, how you want maybe even the state to look at it differently.
Yeah, we'll be running a workshop next week also with the team to find out how can we better link these hubs together. Because there's, for example, Mama Hazel, who was also on that show, I think a year ago or so. She's growing seedlings. Then there's another kitchen, another hub, and they grow some food. So how could she basically provide that other kitchen with seedlings, and she receives then some rice and maize or something from that kitchen? So how can these hubs be better connected also to work out a system? And I think for me really the question is, we have that amazing constitution, there is money in this country, so there is basically also money to run food system programs. How can we channel the state funds into a system that works? And I think the kitchens have shown that they work. So they have gone through COVID, they have gone through load shedding. I mean, load shedding is such a massive challenge for kitchens who want to cook beans. You need hours to cook beans. And if you run out of electricity, all you can do is like your 2 minutes noodles, because that's faster, but that's not something really healthy. And they found, women make plans how to overcome that. And I think the state could really lean into the knowledge that exists in the community and in the network that Nomanda and the team is holding together.
I love this. I want us to just like expand on what is a hub, because that's what I'm thinking about. I think using that word is really great and strategic to move away from the original idea of food kitchens and responding to poverty, as opposed to it being a service to the community. And so some of the ways, and so when we talk about like, I was trying to compare it to a computer lab, computer hub, right? So you've got a computer hub in the middle of a community, and everybody can go there to do their CV, or to use the internet. Even if they have one computer at home that's being used by 5 different people, they can go there and they can sort of, so that changes the context of what this is going to provide. And then from a perspective of feeding also, and Nomanda, maybe you can speak to this, because I'm thinking, even if, because let's say best case scenario, the community is no longer food insecure, but there's still space for a community kitchen. Exactly. So if they are, for instance, feeding all the kids a nutritious meal, or maybe everyone can't afford, like I can only make bread because I'm working during the day, but they're feeding a nutritious meal for the kids every day after school, and it's a safe place for them to be after school, right? That becomes such a huge service for all of the mothers who are working. So are we trying to envision sort of something like that?
Yes, so you were earlier trying to determine also the partnerships that we have with the kitchen. So that speaks closely to that. I did say we started rethinking the existing soup kitchens into community kitchens. So the community kitchens then speaks to a hub. So think of a place like COVID, you were working, you were okay, and then come COVID, you don't have food. You wouldn't go to a soup kitchen because the word soup kitchen is so stigmatized. But if you're thinking, I would rather go to a community kitchen, and you would be providing some kind of service. So for me, I'm also an urban farmer. I know how to grow seedlings. I can go and volunteer and demonstrate to the people in the queue, and then in that return there's skills exchange happening. So I can go teach women how to sew, or even anything. We have men that are going and teaching people how to do planter boxes. And also more than that, you were talking about, a computer lab. We have elderly people that have grandchildren that would have to go register them online. They don't have access to those things, but they could go to a community kitchen, and then it serves also as a hub, and it helps youth that is looking for CVs. We have one of our kitchens with the Colors Foundation. She has like a group of youth where they also get upskilled, and then they also get exposure for job preparation. So it's really serving the communities. So even if we were in a place where we were food secure, you were talking about running low, which determines you to getting bread. But imagine, I'm staying all the way in Folena. I take about 40 minutes max, even more, sitting on the N2. But when I get home, it's evening. I could easily go to a community kitchen and get, dinner instead of rather going. So because the meals, I know that it's decent, it's nutritious. So it's really, serving more than just food, so to speak.
I love this. I love it. I feel like we're just creating a whole new vision for like what they could be. But we are need to take a short break now. Sorry. And Amanda, you're going to be leaving us. But thank you so much for coming on and for speaking.
Thank you for having me.
It's been so valuable.
Thank you. Thank you.
We are going to take a short break, but we'll be back with more after this. Welcome back. You're still watching The Womxn Show, and we are still speaking about food insecurity, food kitchens, and also food networks. And still with us in studio is Nicole Paganini, who is the project lead on Urban Food Futures. And joining us now is Sanelisiwe Mimi Nyaba. And you are a board member, and you've been with Food Agency Cape Town. And so we are continuing that conversation. And so thank you, Mimi, for joining us today.
Happy to be here. Thank you for inviting us.
So maybe I obviously want to bring you on and speak about then your role in the project. So we were speaking before the break about food kitchens and how 90% of them sprang up during COVID-19 when food insecurity was exacerbated by the lockdown. And Namonde was speaking a lot about people's right to food and what that means. And so I just want to ask, with your involvement in both the project and in Food Agency Cape Town, what was your role and your take on I think food kitchens?
On the food kitchens, I think the biggest thing from my side, when we initially started with the research, my role was a mapper. I was mapping where people get food. So I think that would have been maybe one of my first encounters in thinking about at least food kitchens or soup kitchens or community kitchens now within my community at least. And then going towards really when we started then talking about what soup kitchens are and the role that they play, I think more especially the role that they played in COVID, which was a very direct response to people needing food and like the potential of those kitchens to become more than just places to get food. And I'm trying to lead this towards my involvement now, but this is like I'm trying to trace back to this idea of how I think kitchens evolved, even in my sort of understanding of what community kitchens are. And I think then going from there to my mother, who's also was then a part of these processes, and her starting Upaganini Community Kitchen, I think my biggest thing was not necessarily that just that I maybe I'm a bit lazy, but like the biggest thing for me was what does it mean to really document what is happening, whether it's within the kitchen, whether it is how the network that became Food Agency Cape Town, started forming and formalizing. I think my biggest role has been to document those processes, to document and write about the kitchens and write about what's happening, and start to connect what is happening locally with the kitchens into what kind of global sort of conversations are happening, and what kind of and kind of like sort of threading that connection between how local movements like my mother is actually playing a role in a much bigger issue or responding to a much bigger issue. I think that was the biggest thing. And then, of course, then when the research came, which partly was documentation, but I was then involved in sort of facilitating the first initial photo voice processes where we were really trying to look at community kitchens from a network point of view, where we were asking questions such as, how does the kitchen run? What does it take to run a kitchen? And these were sort of the questions that that were pointing towards, like what kind of potential these can look like in more sustainable ways, in more long-term ways. I hope that answers your question.
It does. And Mimi, we had you and your mother, Ma Hazel, on before. Yeah. And so we were speaking about the intersection between doing the research and also actually running the kitchen. And also pull out that word lazy. I think you and I spoke about even intersections of when I started covering food poverty for me, because I'd never been, I can see now how we were food insecure. And I've told this story about, there's a specific story in my head where my mom sent myself and my brothers to go and buy bread. And on the way back, I think we were very young, so we were fighting. And we were hitting each other with the bread. I think I was swinging the bread to like hit them, and the bread packet broke and it fell on the floor. And so we knew we were going to get mom's going to scold. But she freaked. And in my mind as a kid, which was wholly disproportionate to the fact that, I remember screaming just like, you're going to go and, pick up those slices of bread out of the salad. That had never happened before. So now to my adult self, I'm like, oh, she didn't have money for another bread. We did go buy another bread. She made the plan, which is what we're talking about, right? Making the plan. And so I wanted to bring that into the mix in terms of when we look at food kitchens also, because we are changing perspectives here and we're changing how we're thinking about these, what is known as soup kitchens, how they're just responding to poverty. Food is also largely positioned within unpaid care work. And when we think about unpaid care work, it's unrecognized work. It is an accepted form, a task that women do what nobody's thinking about or questioning. And so what I'm loving, I think, and what I want to ask about is when you spoke about the photo voice, when you spoke about the knowledge, when you spoke about how does the kitchen run, I wanted to try and look at, this isn't just women that came out and cooked food and did, something that they are always doing, and it's not relevant and important. It sounds like what you were doing is also gathering very critical and important information around startup culture, around business culture. Does it take, when you were gathering the research, and maybe you can answer it, or Nicole, did it resonate with a lot of when you ask things like, how does the kitchen run? What does it take to start a kitchen or run a kitchen? Did the information seem familiar in terms of the same things that you read when you read how do you start a business?
That's a good question.
Yeah, I think it's really a good question, and it speaks also to how do we factor in not only the actual costs like your electricity, your water, your ingredients, but also how do we factor in our own labor? And I think that is something, because the women are volunteering. That's on the one thing. And the other thing, most of the kitchens are run from the private homes. So people are opening their homes for the community. How do we factor that in as a cost? Because it's a cost.
Yeah.
So because food insecurity is coming to your doorsteps. It's not something that's outside your house. It's really coming to your home. And that's energy training. It's a lot of mental load and emotional load. And it's how can we give a number to that? And I think that is really what also the team is struggling. Also how to factor in the cost, because Mom Hazel, she and all the other women, most of them even put their grants, their pensions, the social grants into it. So they are also subsidizing the kitchens from their own pockets. And I think really looking at it from not only like this intrinsic community spirit, but from a business point of view, is important to know that it's actually the poor communities providing food for the poor communities. And I think that was also kind of an awakening moment for the team to say, okay, what is my time worth? How can,
Can I also say, like so you mentioned Colors Foundation, Caroline Peters, we've had her on. I've gone to her house already where she runs the food kitchen. And the amount of the executive level function that you need to be able to manage a project of this nature. And so again, just taking it into that realm where we're saying, you need to be able to make sure that you have enough to be able to weigh it. It's not just throwing things in a pot and then cooking this food and then giving it to everybody. You have to, I've heard her, very much her and some of the other women who run the food kitchens manage the line, the lengths that they go to in terms of, and I think that just brings us, before we go, I want to speak about then, there was an aspect of networking introduced. So what happened with part of this project was connecting the kitchens to one another for resource sharing. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about that. Like, what was the value? What was the idea behind connecting the kitchens to each other, and what is the value that came out of that?
I think as soon as you were talking about your question, because this is also something that comes out quite a bit, is the idea of sisterhood, or at least the feeling that you're not necessarily operating in solitary. And I think one of the biggest things, maybe even about hunger or poverty, and a lot of the negative feelings that come with being poor, has to do with that shame. And I think shame and that isolation it can make you feel like you're alone. And I think in the context of the kitchens, I think it also can make you question whether or not you actually do have impact. I think from a network perspective, one can really, really start to think about number one, the potential impact, number two, the sharing of the resources, but also really another biggest thing that came out was that I don't think the women realized the amount of exhaustion that they were actually really experiencing it until they did come together. And this is something that really came out quite strong, was the exhaustion, was the guilt, was the feeling the need to be the one to stand up and do something about it. And I think, when you look at things from a bigger picture, and I think especially in the context of these women who, it's quite heroic that they are doing this, but it does paint another kind of picture when you hear them say the same thing. I'm going to hand to you, Nicole, to really unpack. I think there's quite a bit of a conversation around that network side of things. Yeah.
So can I just say, sorry, that I love that. I mean, I was reading Bell Hooks this week, her book, Sisters of the Yam, and she wrote it in the context of Black women and healing. But like one of the things that just stuck with me is Black women reported feeling better when they read books about other Black women who were struggling. I have to say, and then this week also, with all of the homework and the exams and a single mother, so another single mother said to me, you know, thank you so much for sharing, because I feel better knowing other women are also struggling. And so I just wanted to like throw that out there so that we're not just here talking about sort of the practical sustainability of it, but there's this huge, I'm so glad you brought up this huge like holistic value in connecting with each other. And then you go, I don't know, you say, oh, also, you know, that, but also practical elements to them connecting.
Yeah, I think that actually the solidarity component is stronger than the practical, at least for now. So what we want to do is really to build also the practical and logistics. And for example, there's one kitchen, Caroline Peters, who is sending with Uber some food to other kitchens. So that's already a first step. But I think there's still a lot to learn and to improve and to think with a more business lens towards that. But I think that what you were saying and also what Bell Hooks is writing is really also true and so powerful to see in that network how important it is to come together, also to breathe. I mean, the women are working crazy, 16, 18 hours. So it's not only cooking, it's their fundraising, it's their reporting, it's their social medias, etc., and their private lives as well. So taking care of their families. And then going to these network meetings and breathing and feeling that you're not alone in this is really key.
I love that. And that's obviously not often prioritized, not often seen as legitimate, if we think about it. But actually, it's a huge part of managing the mental health. And especially, we saw during COVID, also reports were coming out about the mental health of frontline workers, the secondary, the vicarious trauma that you feel because you are helping other people who are so destitute, and the different ways that manifested. So even as a helper, there's so much trauma in that interaction, and also in the limitation of the things that you can do and can't do. I wanted to bring this out also, I think for both of you, to just from personal experience, but also from personal experience from interacting with the women, and then also from the research. There's a perception also from the community sometimes that the women who run food kitchens, because it's almost whether they have an NGO or they don't have a registered NGO, but especially if you have a registered NGO, that you are rich or you've got lots of funding. The reason you're able to feed so many people, even as they receive it, there is a perception that they are like better off and that they are able to do this. And so I wanted to just get some feedback from you on what lived reality is like. Nicole, you did say earlier, some of them take their own pensions and they subsidize, but like, what does this actually look like? You know, for people who might see them in the community, might be beneficiaries, might not understand, might think that they are privileged.
I think, I mean, it really also even starts towards, and I mean, I think Mom Hazel's kitchen is definitely like a good example of that journey, or at least what it actually really takes is that it's a struggle, number one, to even get registered. So that's like already on its own. And if you're not registered, you can't necessarily receive sustainable funding. There are funders that will not even look at you twice when you're not registered. And I mean, I think factor in, I think the idea even around the labor. I think, for example, this was, I think we were reporting back last year after you guys did like those really short kitchen surveys to look at how, what goes into, what kind of resources or how much time and how much it costs. Mom Hazel didn't record the stuff that she got from her garden, like the veggies, as a cost, because she just figures, you know, it comes from her. She didn't pay any money, but factor in that labor that comes with that. So I think it is very easy to look from the outside and I think perceive that things are okay. And I think especially from a community perspective, there were a lot of like lessons learned because initially she had been providing food for ECDs. And I think one of the biggest things that we had to have a conversation about was, especially if you're thinking of running not a soup kitchen, but a community kitchen where there's a kind of relationship between the community and the kitchen, is that you always run at risk of being not necessarily perceived, but the action of people just coming to get food and leaving and not building a kind of relationship is your intention of starting a particular thing might actually just return to the kind of relationship that people have with kitchens anyway. So it was a case of whether the ECDs that, couldn't have their own food just expected her to show up and give food, but didn't necessarily give anything back to the kitchen. And I was like, I had to call that out, and I was like, they are treating you like a soup kitchen. You are not a community kitchen if they are going to expect you to give food without really building a kind of relationship with that kitchen. And I think it does take a while for even the community to realize that the space that they're coming in to dish up from is potentially something that where a relationship can be built and there can be some kind of co-ownership.
Sorry to cut you, Mimi. We've got 2 minutes left. I really love that because I see also that's something that people women who run soup kitchens have said in terms of the behavior of some of the people who collect the food. And so that's also the basis for the question is like, what is it really like? Nicole, I've got 2 minutes. Do you have anything to add before we go?
Well, I think this work is really important and that it's driven by the community itself. And I think that is really powerful because your team is also discussing what needs to be discussed in the dialogues, for example. And I think that's really powerful for me as a researcher, as an outsider, to see how the research is taken up by the women and how important they consider it as a part of their endeavor.
Okay. I love that very much. I love that we're ending off on a note where we are challenging just sort of, I think you said earlier, it's not, or someone said earlier, it's not just give and receive. That we are challenging the notion. I think that hopefully people can go out there and they can look at the community kitchens differently as not just a provider of meals, but also as a hub that one can form a relationship with. I really like that. And so maybe the answer is some of the things we've said. I think Nomonde said before this is like, how can I help? How can I bring in my skills, whether that is I know how to cultivate seeds or I know how to teach people to knit or I have an extra computer that can be used as a computer lab. Because as we were today, people don't just come there for the food, even if that's just what's on offer. So ladies, thank you. We are out of time. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
And so we are going to take another short break, but we'll be back with more after this.
Run, run, run. Hello, good day. My name is Avril Andrews, and I'm from Hanover Park. I'm the founder of the Alcado Andrews Foundation in Hanover Park, a very interesting community to live in. So we're running a community kitchen. Since 2016, and we feed daily from 10:30 to 12 o'clock. So we've got even different groups in our lines that we feed daily. Hanover Park is a gang-infested area. There's a lot of gang violence, but some of these guys come to the community kitchen daily, and how you need to understand who you're dealing with and how you need to serve. I mean, I'm just grateful to be able to serve with so much love and kindness and compassion. And I'm grateful to God for this opportunity for not only me, but also the rest of the team to serve our community and to be part of the changes in our community.
Hi, I'm Hazel Nyaba from Upakanini Community Kitchen. Upakanini Community Kitchen started during just after the COVID in 2020. The aim of Upakanini Community Kitchen was to feed the ECDs that are in the community. So it expanded to be a community kitchen that is feeding the whole community. Like, we dish in the morning porridge, as you can see here. We also have the ECD now. It expanded to be the ECD as well. there's a lot that we are doing. It's not just food, because the main aim is for the people to come and put their plates and then come into the workshop, whatever, or the dialogue, whatever we have, and yeah, then they get their plates and go, to minimize the stigma of the people that are queuing outside.
I know it's not always easy for everybody to serve. You might not be able to serve a community, but even if you serve one, if you share your meal with one person daily, somebody that doesn't have, it can make a huge difference. Thank you so much for listening to me.
Welcome back. You're still watching The Womxn Show, and we've been having a great conversation around food networks, food kitchens, and food insecurity. Now, aside from everything else, one of the amazing things that has come through is the courage, resilience, and persistence of women in communities to solve problems. And this is why we wanted to bring some of their voices into the studio. We are going to have a look at a short video with narratives from some of the women who run food kitchens and to tell us about what it means to them. Let's have a look. Those were some of the powerful voices of women who run food kitchens in communities. And that is all we have for today. Thank you for joining us. I'm Lenina Rassool. Goodbye.